Hello, everyone.
I'm Karl.
And I'm Em.
Welcome to our podcast discussing all of the latest books. This is our 24th episode, and we'll be discussing New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. We'll be saving our ratings until the very end.
We promise to give you all of our honest opinions on all the characters, chapters, and scenarios. We don't mean any harm to any of the authors. This is solely our opinion. And as always, we promise to call them like we read them.
Period. So, trigger warnings for this book. First of all, get this out of the way. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, hallucinations, attempted suicide, references, recklessness. That's not really a trigger, but just several things that some might consider attempted suicide. She claims that wasn't her goal. And then you've got homicidal threats towards the end. You've got torture threats. Huh?
Near drowning.
Near drowning. References to actual death.
Stalking.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of dark issues in this book. They're like referenced, but not super in depth, other than Bella's depression, for where she was like a ghost, her dad says. Other than that, they're sort of referenced and passed over. They're not grave detail. It's not graphic, really. But as always, take care of yourself, and spoilers will lie ahead.
If you don't want to hear how this book ends, please pause here. Where have you been for the last 20 years? Go read it and then come back to this episode. And hopefully we're back. And we did read this one. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Are you ready to get started?
Let's get into it. Okay. So first, the dedication is actually a quote from Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 6. And it says, "These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which as they kiss, consume." I didn't feel like that rhymed like I thought it was going to. And then the little blurb on the back is, "I knew we were both in mortal danger. Still, in that instant, I felt well, whole. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, the blood pulsing hot and fast through my veins again. My lungs filled deep with the sweet scent that came off his skin. It was like there had never been any hole in my chest. I was perfect, not healed, but as if there had never been a wound in the first place."
Okay. As Bella is preparing for her birthday, the Cullens decide to throw her a birthday party. At the party, Bella gets a paper cut, which results in Jasper losing control. Edward then decides his life and him in Bella's life is just too risky, and he decides to leave her. Bella ends up falling into a depression without any hope from her friends or family of bringing her out of it. That is, until Bella decides to go out with Jessica one night and discovers that risking her life brings a little bit of Edward back into it. I wanted to kind of talk about first the dream that happens at the beginning of the book, where Bella is standing in a reflection of her gran, or who she thinks is her gran, and it ends up being her. Honestly, her dreams in general, I do think give a lot of context to a lot of situations. I feel like her subconscious is a little smarter than she is kind of situation. I know it sounds really bad.
I think you might be right.
I just feel like her subconscious figures out all of the riddles pretty quickly, and then she's just like, I don't know.
Maybe that's to show us that she actually knows, but is actively choosing not to know, maybe. Subconsciously she does know, but she just in her conscious is denying it and doesn't want to acknowledge it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can get behind that.
I don't know that that's the intention, because that sounds really smart, and I don't think this writing, no offense to Stephanie, but I don't think this writing was that intelligent. But I could be wrong. Maybe none of us realize that. Maybe that's on us.
Yeah, I definitely think that this dream, she basically just realizes that she's going to get older than Edward. And I don't know if it's just all of a sudden was a realization for her, because I mean, I would have thought about it, I think, before I said yes to knowing any information about him. If I'm falling for you and you can't age, I'm gonna need to know about that pretty quickly. So
I think like she has made comments that like she wants to be changed since the end of Twilight, but that's also been very short period of time now. So I think having those thoughts and like this thought process that she's thinking about, she wants to be changed and wants to be changed, is probably what caused the dream in general. But I agree. I would have been like, no, like we either need to commit to that or not commit to that, because I'm not going to be with you for 2 years and then spend the rest of my mortal life missing you like a fiend. No, I'm not doing that.
well, and my thing too is I realized, I think there was a comment made in here that like her anniversary of coming to school was actually January. And so then she basically got left like beginning summer kind of situation, beginning of the actual school year. And then
I think her birthday's in September, so I think it would have been about September that it took off. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's about 9-ish months, which about 3 of those months I think he spent ignoring you. So about 6 months of you actually being in a relationship with this guy.
Yeah.
You realize that he's like your life. You can't live without him. You want to become a vampire for him. And then he leaves you for another 6 months. And then, of course, at the end, we get where he proposes to her. And so it's just like, you're willing to risk a lot of things for some guy that you've really collectively only spent 6 months with. So
that's what I kept thinking. And this is jumping ahead, but at the end, when he says, like, how could you ever believe what I said? I'm thinking, why would she not? She barely knows you.
Yeah. To be honest, I think that she knows more about Edward's family than I think he knows about her family, to be honest.
That's fair.
I mean, they have their whole, history of the vampire lineage that she finds out about, and I don't think he even knows what her grandparents' names are at this point.
That's very accurate, I think. But like even then, like she knows like surface level. She doesn't really know. Like I don't remember what book it is. Maybe it's Eclipse that we talk about. When he was very first a vampire, like what he did or whatever. We don't really get into that detail, I don't think, until later. He briefly, I think, mentions it, but it's very brief and there's no details. But then later we actually get into details. So, like, she doesn't even know him. You know what I'm saying? Like, she doesn't, I don't know. Which, after rereading these, I'm not so sure that I know him either. I was enamored with him, and now I'm kind of like, he's a little weird.
To be honest, after reading Midnight Sun, yeah, I honestly, I don't know.
I'm not saying I'm switching over to Team Jacob, because I'm not. But I'm not so sure that
to be honest, I was reading this, like after reading Edward's perspective, it has changed the way I read all of these, to be honest, because like this one, I know you're probably thinking something stupid like you were with the last book. It was just too much. And like Jacob, the way he was talking, I was like, oh, maybe he's actually like a normal sense of thinking here, because he doesn't seem to like filter what his thoughts are, but I don't know.
He's not either. Also, the like reference to him being like 6'5", and then you watch the movie, and I love Taylor Lautner's, like I'm not dogging him, but he's obviously not 6'5". He's not even close. So this like massive mammoth of a man in the book, because it's not even just height. Like she says, he's lanky at first, and then he grows, buff and fills out too.
Yeah.
Compared to Taylor Lautner, was a little weird. Like the image of Taylor wouldn't get out of my head, and so every time it would bring back up, oh, he's so tall, I had to crank my neck back. I'm thinking, you would be eye to eye with Taylor. I'm confused. So I struggled with that. Again, we've talked about this before too. Like I like to read the book and picture who I think the character would look like, and then see the movie to see who else. And that wasn't how it was for me, obviously, for this series either. So it kind of ruins a little bit of that part. I have to like just pretend she didn't say he was 6'5" every time she brings it back up.
Sorry. So when we get to her birthday, she is very much not wanting to celebrate it whatsoever.
Correct.
Which
she doesn't want to be 18 to Edward's 17. 17 for 100 years.
Yeah. So I was a little like, okay, but it just seemed like she was so like depressed about it. It wasn't that she was like angry, oh, I'm another year older. But again, you've only known this man collectively for about 6 months at this point. Even at this point, I think it was only like 6 months. So like, You
Makes
can't
no
be
sense.
mad that he doesn't want to change you yet whenever you both don't know each other well enough.
Agreed.
But they end up going to kind of talking about how the experience of, like, they were watching Romeo and Juliet and they were talking about the experience of being changed and all of that kind of stuff. Edward does kind of let them in, or let her in a little bit about the Volturi and kind of what they mean to the family, which I just imagine them like the Queen of England or the King of England, like,
Yeah.
just the king and queen of vampires kind of situation. They just exercise their rules and regulations, which honestly, did they have a council meeting to design those? Like, it was just a statement put out, like, this is what y'all have to abide by. Like,
They're thousands of years old. So
Yeah.
I imagine a couple of old white men got together around a table and said, we're going to be in charge.
Yeah.
That's just how it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say this while we're talking about them. I love Marcus. And I love how bored he is with everything that happens. I love it.
Yeah, I meant to go watch the movie again before we did this, but I didn't get to. But
I did actually watch this one, so before we recorded this episode. Twilight I watched after we recorded.
I'm gonna watch it.
You have to.
So finish Eclipse.
He's just like sitting in his chair. It's so funny. I love it. And also, for those listening, I just imitated Marcus, if you couldn't tell.
Also, wasn't his power like to see like the strength of relationships or something?
Yes, and I did not remember that until we reread this, and I don't think it's talked about in the movie.
I don't think so either, but whenever I read that, I was just like, I don't think that's fitting to who he is, but maybe
that's probably why he's
be quiet and observe.
That's probably why he's so bored and over everything, because he doesn't have a relationship with anybody, and he can tell anytime he probably tries to get one, he can tell it's going nowhere.
True. So they end up having a birthday party and as Bella is opening up one of the presents, she paper cuts her finger. And as Bella describes it, she looks up into the bright eyes, blood pulsing out of my arm, into the fevered eyes of 6 suddenly ravenous vampires. And so she ends up having this situation where, like, basically they all shove Jasper, they shove her. She ends up flying into a glass table. And
the idiocy of shoving her back into the table that has glass. I will never understand that. Why it was written, why it was put in the movie. It is stupid. It is so stupid. She had one little paper cut, and then you shoved her into this table full of glass, and now she's got cuts everywhere, and like so bad it has to be stitched.
Okay, so here's my question for you. Charlie was an officer, correct?
Charlie is the sheriff.
How in the world did he not ever suspect domestic violence?
Oh my gosh, I know. Especially after the first book when they get in that argument, and that's how she convinces Charlie she has to run away. Then all of a sudden she comes back and they're just grand and dandy. She's injured. And that's when they come back and they're all grand and dandy. And Edward's the one that found her out there. She fell down the stairs. Okay, Lily. And then the entire time she's there, comes home with an injury from her birthday party. She comes home with an injury from somewhere else too during Twilight. Felt like she had the accident. But
when she went to the push, she ended up like falling or something and scraping her hand or something. But I think it was talked about in Twilight. I know it was talked about New Moon, or not.
Either way, even if it wasn't physical, the way that she has this like unhealthy attachment to him, I guess because Charlie's a man, and also this was written in 2005, so maybe that's really why. But I agree that I would have been like, "Girl, are you okay?"
Mm-hmm.
You good?
Especially as the sheriff, I would imagine that he would have a little bit more of like inkling to the situation.
Well, maybe that's why he hates him at the end of New Moon and beginning of Eclipse.
I think it was more so the fact that Bella keeps not being a mature person like she was and actually decides to do some stupid stuff.
I definitely think it was part of that. I think he not maybe not hates Edward, but he also blames Edward for those 4 months that she was essentially
Yeah.
empty, and how he could hurt her like that and then just think that would go away or whatever.
So as she's getting mended, she kind of has a moment with Carlisle because all of the vampires had to leave the room. And Carlisle, I really like how he talks to her, and she asks, like, how do you do this? Like, why do you enjoy being a doctor, being around all this blood and all this kind of, obvious questions that you would have to a vampire that's playing doctor. And he says, what I enjoy the most about is when my enhanced abilities let me save someone who would otherwise we have lost. Some people's lives are better because I exist. Even the sense of smell is used as a useful diagnostic tool at times. So his perspective, though, on being a doctor while he's a vampire, I think is very useful. And I do think that Carlisle has had a big problem with what he is and making the best of it. And I think I would even say he's probably one that even struggles, I would say, as much as Jasper, if not more, because he's just struggled with the thought, not particularly the blood, but like the thought of being a vampire. I think that he has struggled with it the most, and he's tried to rectify what the world would be without vampires so much more with who they are, kind of, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, no, I definitely think, and it was interesting to hear why he wanted to be a doctor, why he wanted to go that route, especially after sort of like how he grew up with his dad, and like so much hatred was there, and like he wanted to help and love people, and was able to do so pretty quickly after becoming a vampire. I mean, it wasn't, he's not just now a doctor, he's been a doctor for quite some time. Yeah. And even not succumbing to the peer pressure like of Aro and the other Volturi of doing a different lifestyle and living a different way and trying that way. So I really love Carlisle. And I think I said this on the last episode, but like now as an adult reading these books, I'm Team Carlisle or Team Charlie. 1000%. Every time they do something, I'm like, that's not baby. That's not man. Like I like them.
Yeah. I do think Carlisle, especially after hearing his story of why he changed Edward, I really do think that he does everything, with thought, and I do think he is choosing people who otherwise would not have made it either. So I do think that that's part of what I respect about him as well a lot too.
So I was going to ask you, so do you think it was justified to change them because they were going to die one way or another, even if his theory about souls and whatnot is wrong? What if it does damn their soul? And if they had just died a human, it wouldn't have necessarily. What do you think about that?
I think it's subjective because, like, I would think it's similar to religion. Like, some people believe that, you are going to hell no matter what, and you've got to earn your way to heaven. Some people believe you go to heaven no matter what, and then you do things in your life to change you to go to hell. Some people don't believe that there's either situation that happens in the afterlife and you just die or whatever. So I think it's subjective in that aspect, that it really just depends on the person, and unless they actually die and have a sense of where they're going, it's really hard to say no matter what. I think Esme was the only one that he really did that for, but I also think in a way he was trying to save her because she had died or was dying because she jumped off the cliff or whatever. So I do think that most of them were selfless turnings because he wanted to have some good that he shares to the world. Like, it's almost, I don't know how to describe it without it being like, it's selfish and selfless at the same time. Like, I think he selflessly changed them to keep them alive, to keep the world a better place. But I think he selflessly did it because he knew that he could help them stay on the right track and make the world better and not be like the rest of the groupings of vampires that were out there, if that makes sense. I know there's a lot of rambling.
You're good. So I actually read it as Carlisle changed them to have company. I know that he wanted us to be better and he encouraged them to be better. But, like, for example, Esme's a great example of this. He changed her. She killed herself. That was her intention. And he changed her. So now she's immortal and lives with the same damage that she had as a human. And so, like, it's interesting to me that, like, he thought it was better for her to be changed, potentially into a creature whose soul may now be damned. He doesn't know one way or another. He might not believe that way, but he doesn't really know. No, but it's interesting to me that he thought, like, that was appropriate, even though she wanted to die already.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, like, I just find it really interesting to think about. And it really is a case-by-case basis. You know, it's different with each of them. But Esme's a great example. That was her intention, was to die. And then he changed her, and that doesn't just go away. But I guess it worked out for her, obviously, because she had Carlisle and Edward to help her through that. But who says she wouldn't just wake up and then also still want to be dead? You know what I'm saying? Like,
True.
So I think it was selfish. I don't necessarily, like, judge him for that. Like, I love Carlisle. Like, I don't think he's a bad person because he did that. But I do think turning them really at the core of it was probably selfish. And because, like, who says they wanted to be, first of all, who says they wanted to be turned? Then who says they wanted to be turned and live a life of only animal blood and every day struggle with denying themselves of the one thing that their entire body craves? Like, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't really make their life any easier.
True.
So I don't know. I think it's really interesting to think about. But if they were real, I want to join. Let me just add that.
I do agree. I do think that it could be a struggle for most of. I mean, it is a struggle for most of them to do that. But I can see where it could be because he was doing it selfishly. But I do think that he also had good intentions with his selfishness. I do think that. I think he was only trying to save them from themselves or from their choices and things like that. So in a way, I could also see where he probably thought that he was saving their souls rather than, anything. And so, I mean, Edward was going to die. I mean, no matter what. So, I mean, that was, kind of something that his mother asked of him. And then,
well, and Edward is one, I think, like, his mom did ask him. So, like, I can kind of see, like, that first one being, she asked me to do it, and so I had the means and I did it. And then, like, with Esme, her literally attempting suicide felt way more selfish to me than, but obviously we don't get that, like, did he see her on the hill after she jumped and realized it was his mate and he couldn't live without her and that's why he changed her, which would be selfish, but also, like, would sound romantic. And then you have, like, Rosalie and Emmett, so he's already got a wife and a son now, and now he's adding 2 more kids to the mix. And so, like, we just keep building, and I think Edward
Rosalie
really
was
struggled.
Selfish because he said that Rosalie was made for to be Edward's mate, and they just found each other like siblings. So I think Rosalie was initially a selfish kind of choice, but then Emmett was a selfish choice on Rosalie's part.
Yes, I would agree. I would agree with that she wanted Emmett to be saved, but Carlisle did technically still do it. Yeah, but I get that one. But, like, Rosalie, like, he found her in the street after her husband or her boyfriend or fiance, whatever it was at the time, soon to be husband or something. I can't remember what the title was. The point. Yeah, and his friends essentially assaulted her and left her for death. And so, but, like, what to him made him think, oh no, she's half on the brink of death anyway, so I'll just change her to be a vampire instead of letting her die and being done with it. Like, I don't know, like, it's just interesting to me because, and I love Carlisle, and, like, he's a wonderful, like, father figure for these people, but like, Edward struggled so bad with resisting and did kill people for quite some time. So, like, how he thought, what I'm going to do is make another one and make another one and make another one so that they can do the struggle also. But I'm going to tell them they have to be better. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just seemed kind of odd to me. But again, Carlisle, I'm next. No, I'm just kidding.
So, after the party...
Let me ask you this. Because you were Team Jacob. Did you want to be a vampire when you read this? Okay. So I'm a weirdo. Thanks.
Well, I mean,
I wanted to be Bella. Like, when I read this, I was like, forget her. She's weird. Let me be Bella.
I was more like, I don't know. I liked the story of the wolves better because they actually had like the bonded like
Imprint.
that they had. So like to me, like the love at first sight kind of thing was more of like something that drew me in rather than like the lifelong commitment to a cold stone. So like,
Cold Stone. So
I
did
thought it
you
was
want to
I
be
thought
a
it was
werewolf
interesting.
or did you just want to be a wolf girl?
Wolf girl.
Okay.
Yeah. I did find it interesting as far as the vampire, especially the take of the Cullens and the Denali's. Like I did find them trying to be vegetarians kind of an interesting take on vampirism, but it wasn't like, oh my god, Edward has to turn me like so we can live together. Because honestly, especially now, I think I would get too annoyed after hundreds of years with the same person. I don't know if I could do it.
I
Like,
agree. Now I'm
it's a
like,
lot.
oh, no, maybe
It's
not.
a lot. But I mean, I did really love the imprinting thing, especially like all of that. Like that was what kind of intrigued me about it. But it was more so like the love at first sight kind of thing, just because when I first read it, that was kind of like the books I was into, was like the love at first sight romance kind of situation. So
I also love the idea of like, I think I said this on the last episode too, because I'm a weirdo, but the like, you see each other and you just know.
yeah,
There's no like build up and there's no like, you might possibly cheat in 3 months. You know what I mean? Like, they're
yeah,
like their souls are really tied together. Like it's
yeah.
destiny. Like I love the idea of that. Now, technically, we don't know that after they imprint that they don't cheat because it's never explored. But I guess it could be a possibility. I know you don't want to think about that though. We don't want to talk about that. We want to live in the fantasy realm of that never happens.
Well, I just don't know how it would, because I mean, like talk about like the imprint
He
bond
imprints
and
on a
they,
baby.
yeah.
So it ain't sexual at that point. So he could be
No.
getting his fiends with somebody else after he imprinted on her.
No, but the way they talk about it, it was just like they don't want anybody else. Like their soul is drawn to that one person, and there's nobody else for them, kind of situation.
Yeah, I struggle with that though once he imprints on the baby. I got it with Sam and what's her name? What's her name?
Emily.
Emily. I got that he was dating Leah, he imprinted and like he didn't care nothing about Leah no more and he was all Emily. I got it with that one. But Jacob imprinting on the baby confuses me. But we'll talk more about that later on, I'm sure. But
Yeah, I think one of the other ones imprints on a child as well.
what?
Yeah, I think it was like Paul or somebody. It was like a 7 or 8-year-old.
What? I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's whenever Bella's hanging out at La Push with like he's in the movie. I think it kind of like shows it, but he's like off in the distance playing with a child or something on at La Push.
In what movie?
Eclipse.
When does Bella go back to La Push? She's not welcome.
She is in Eclipse.
No. Edward's back. She's not allowed back over there.
No, she
No,
is.
she does. They
She
go
spends
tell
time with
stories.
him.
They tell
Yeah.
stories. Yeah, okay. Okay. We'll see if it's brought up in the next book then. We'll see. I don't remember that though. Paul imprinting on a 7-year-old. Let me also say this. Of the Wolf Boys, loved Paul. Anger issues and all. And if that doesn't tell you that I have trauma, I don't know what does.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Okay.
He was my favorite. He was my favorite, and then I loved Seth, obviously, but we get him later. So
Yeah, I love Seth.
I didn't like Leah.
Mm-mm.
I was like, she can get these hands. I can't stand her mouth. We get it. He left you. Get over yourself.
So one of the presents that she got from Carlisle, or not Carlisle, gosh, I can't keep those names straight. Charlie and Renee was that they got a photo album and a picture or camera for her, save all of her memories. The Cullens got her some plane tickets to go visit her mother for Edward and her. And then Edward, which loved this idea of a gift, is he got her his compositions, like the music that he's wrote, some performances that he's done and everything. Such a sweet idea.
It was
Loved
so
it so
cute.
much.
Yeah.
But at that point, he is acting a little weird and talking about how, you know, a paper cut shouldn't have been her end all be all kind of situation. So he starts acting really funky, and so she starts trying to document everything with her camera. And
But you can't tell me she really didn't understand why he was acting out. He was like throwing a fit.
I think, to be honest, though, whenever one of them decides to break up, I think there's always a moment that you just like know. Yeah. And like I feel like it was drawn on a little bit more than what it typically would be.
I agree. I think you know it's coming.
I think like you know it's coming, but if you do really like somebody, you kind of like stall on it. Like thinking,
you don't want to accept that it's coming, kind of thing.
Yeah, that you know that it's happening. I did that with my ex. Like I knew for like probably 2 weeks that it was probably coming, and I just like continued letting it go. Honestly, it was probably months because he was cheating on me. But you know, it was just.
I was about to say I can't even say it was 2 weeks. So
yeah, but it's just you're just not wanting to accept it and move on. Which I mean, there's better things out there for you, so accept it.
I think it's like. But it was different with them because, like, he wasn't cheating on her. He was just literally giving her the cold shoulder. Also, I'm so confrontational. I could not go 3 days with you just giving me the silent treatment and never addressing it. I'd probably punch you, like, to make you say something. I can't do that. Just don't come near me then. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. If you're just going to give me the silent treatment, we might as well literally day one be done.
Yeah.
If you don't talk to me within like 24 hours of something happening and you just ignore me entirely, we're broken up. I don't care what you say.
Well, especially something like that severe. Like, why not just sit here and kind of have a conversation about it and address the situation?
And then they're in class together and walking together places, but he's just not talking to her. At lunch, she's just quietly eating her food. No, absolutely not. That's Bella again, though, being like, not like dependent, but like sort of like feeling the like submissive role in a relationship, like letting him control what happens, letting him dictate. I ain't that way.
Yeah. Well, and it's even so whenever he goes to like break up with her, he like leads her into the middle of the forest, which was kind of dumb anyway.
And she just goes.
Yeah, she's like, okay, let's go for a walk. No problem. But he then addresses it as like, hey, we're leaving. And she instantly is like, oh, where are we going? And he's like, you're not going anywhere. And she's like, what do you mean? Are you going to come back for me after a bit? Like, you know, I'll come with you. And so it's just very much like, let me drop my whole life for you, even though I've known you for 6 months to go wherever you want me to go. Yeah. And he does say, which was kind of cringeworthy, but like the whole scene I marked as cringe because rereading it, I was just like, okay, all right. And so he says, and she's like, when you say we, and he says, I mean myself and my family. And she said, okay, I'll come with you. And he says, you can't, Bella, where we're going, it's not the right place for you. And she says, where is the right place for me? And he says, I'm no good for you, Bella. And she says, don't be ridiculous. You're the very best part of my life. And he says, my world is not for you. So, and then he kind of twists his own words back at her because she says, you know, you promised in Phoenix, you promised that you would stay. And he says, as long as it was best for you. And then they have a fight about like whether or not Edward's finding it about her soul. And then he says, I don't want you to come with me. And she instantly says, you don't want me? And he says, no. And she just instantly was just like, well, that changes things.
I would have lost my mind.
Well, especially after he sits there and says, like, he says, of course, I'll always love you in a way. But what happened the other night made me realize it's time for a change because I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not, Bella. I'm not human. I've let this go on for so long. Almost like I'm bored with you. Like, I'm done. I'm, like, bored. Like, I don't want anything more to do with you. You were just my plaything for a bit, kind of, like, attitude.
Yeah, I would have punched him in the face. You wanted privacy and ain't nobody gonna watch me now. Hit you. That, like, balance is not the answer. I would not have punched him. But I don't understand this level of just, like, standing there and being like, okay. That's it.
Acceptance, yeah.
And then she curls up in a ball on the forest floor and almost dies.
Yeah.
And, like, I get it. You're so hurt, like, that you can't function. But, okay. Yell at him get it out, something. I would, like, what do you mean? So, like, because was all of it fake? When did you decide this? Like, I would have had questions.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean he had to answer them, but I at least would have asked them.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then, like, because then she said something about, like, she wanted to say goodbye to Alice. Because it's not just Edward she has a relationship with. And he's like, no, we thought it'd be best for a clean break.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd have been like, you're not in charge of me or Alice. Thank you very much. So I will be saying bye. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
it was weird. I don't know. I guess that's just like her. I don't want to say submissive even, but it's almost just like, she's kind of like puny. Like I don't know what the best word is, but she's just kind of like okay, just accepted it.
To be honest,
she didn't even ask herself those questions. She just, okay, lay down on the ground.
The best part that I could take from it was more so she really became their pet. Like, she really did do whatever they asked of her, damned the consequences.
Down to the fact that he made her promise to not be reckless, and she promised.
I would say you have no room to ask me to promise anything if you are leaving my side for the rest of my life.
No, I said, in fact, you know what? That's not right. Today, as soon as you leave, I'm going to go walk in front of traffic, you little jerk. You know what I'm saying, though? Like,
yeah.
What? It's just insane. It's so weird. And I didn't remember it being written that way in the book. And I thought the movie was just awkward and bad acting. Mm-hmm. And then we reread it, and I'm like, oh, no, it was written that way. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sure. That's how it would have happened.
I'm going to be honest, I had that same reaction. I was like, man, this is just bad acting, like most of it. But, like, I tab so much in Twilight and this book of cringeworthy stuff. Like, I ran out of the cringe colored tabs. Like, I was just like, we're just gonna, at some point I decided we're just gonna say it's all cringe and just stop tabbing it. Like, it was just like, okay. And especially, like, so they, like, find her in the forest and they bring her back home, and she just, like, is curled up in a ball with a doctor that's going to tend to her. And then they start talking about how, like, the wolves, basically the pack in La Push, was, like, celebrating the Cullens leaving, and just, like, weird behavior that just was like, okay. And then she just
also
swirls for 4 months.
It's much better in the movie to get to see her swirl. I think it's hilarious. But also, Sam is 21. Mm-hmm. Where? That man in that movie is 35 at the youngest. Yeah. I was like, what do you mean he's 21? I forgot all about that.
I felt really bad for her too whenever Charlie, like, which I understand, like, Charlie was not probably equipped for her depression at all. But then he just, like, snaps and is like, I'm going to ship you off to your mom. And I don't think that was the best way of approaching that. But I do think that because of that started kind of like a trail of figuring out, like, who, like, opening up that door for her to, like, step out and find a new world of friends and different things like that. Like, I don't think if all that hadn't happened, she would have opened up to, obviously, Jacob. But she does decide to go out to the movies with Jessica to, like, prove Charlie wrong that she's getting out and about, which I think Jessica was the worst person for her to choose.
I totally agree. I would have went with Angela every day of the week.
Or even Mike or Eric or somebody. Like, I would have chosen at least 6 of them before Jessica. Like, but
agreed.
She ends up going, and she thinks that these guys standing outside of a bar are some of the men that she had ran into in the first book, which, why would you try to approach them?
Exactly. You were terrified in the first book. What makes you think, let me go walk over here and see if that's them?
I personally...
Did she, like, if she had thoughts that I bet he's still stalking me, even though he claims he has left, and, like, he'll pull up if I go do this or something, then it would make sense to me. She didn't have any of those thoughts. She never once even thought he doubted leaving her. So, what did she think walking up to these guys that she thought were going to assault her, like, 2 months ago, was going to change? It wasn't 2 months ago. It was like 4 or 5, but still, like what? And now they're on bikes with more buddies outside of a bar. And then when he says, "You want to have a drink?" And she's like, "I'm too young."
Mm-hmm.
And then he still continues to pursue. I was like, "That's a pedophile, baby. You need to get on." That's going to be worse than the teenage boys you saw on the street the other day, probably. So you better skedaddle.
Mm-hmm.
It was weird. And in the movie, she rides the bike. In the book, she doesn't get on his bike.
Yeah. Which was even weirder.
It just was. It's just not good. It doesn't make sense.
Well, my thought is that she was hoping that he was like stalking her or whatever. But then
yeah,
she's almost
if
like
she had those thoughts, totally made sense.
Well, she's like offended almost afterwards that Jessica's finding the whole situation like weird. Like,
yeah, I'd say no, she's not getting on your bike. No, she's not having a drink. Get your ace up this hill. We're going. I'll drag you up to the car. I got ain't no, you ain't risking my life because you want to be stupid.
Well, and then it's even weirder that she starts like hearing Edward's voice.
That is one of the dumbest things in this entire series. Okay, because listen, if she believed that man left her and did not love her, then he's not stalking her, and nor should she hear his voice to stay safe because he doesn't care if she's safe.
Well, the part is though, is if she was willing to accept his words if he doesn't care about her anymore, why would she think he's still stalking her anyways?
And why he would care if she's actually being reckless.
Yeah.
Make up your mind. Did you or did you not? I need to know. Yeah. It didn't make any sense.
No clue.
It also didn't make any sense because then she's got, after that, it gets progressively worse, and she like strings Jacob along and doing stuff with her too, and he actually does show concern.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, "Nah, like that's not who I want to be concerned. I want the guy that left me, who said he did not love me. I want to hear his voice, and him tell me he's concerned, even though I know it's a figment of my imagination." What do you mean? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't make sense. But honestly, I ain't gonna lie to you. As a teenager, I was eating that up. It's like, oh, she heard Edward's voice.
That is true. It's not this perspective that I have now, for sure.
Yeah, it's different now. But I didn't think a thing about it back then.
So Bella decides to buy some motorcycles and enlists the help of Jacob Black in rebuilding them. As it happens, she works on rebuilding herself as well. She continues with her risky behavior to continue hearing Edward, but decides to go with her friends to the movies. After Jacob ends up sick, he stops talking to her and ignoring her calls. Bella decides to confront Jacob and uncovers the truth about the pack and Jacob's lineage. After Bella accepts Jacob, she decides to do some cliff diving, resulting in further drama.
Further drama.
I had to add some drama to the drama.
I was gonna say, this entire thing is just dramatic, so.
Yeah, true.
Everything.
So Bella ends up stopping by some random house and picking up a couple bikes and decides that she's going to ask Jacob to end up helping her rebuild them. She basically just says, "Hey, I'll give you one of the bikes for your free labor. I'll buy all the parts." And he agrees to it and is fine with it. He's honestly, I think, really excited just to have her around. I think he may have like hinted at that he felt something for Bella a little bit to his friends just by their reaction. But I think he thought, oh, the Collins are gone. Now I kind of maybe have my chance to slide up in here.
She wants to spend time with me. Like,
yeah,
you're a child. Stop.
So they are kind of trying to keep it hidden from Billy and Charlie that what they're doing. And so they are hiding out in the garage. And I do really like the part where Jacob, or she says about Jacob, it was Jacob himself. Jacob was simply perpetually a happy person. He carried happiness with him like an aura, sharing it with whoever was near him. Like an earthbound sun, whenever somebody was within his gravitational pull, Jacob warned them. It was natural, a part of who he was. No wonder I was eager to see him. So, like, he really, I feel like, helped her move on from Edward. I mean, not fully, obviously, because she was trying to do this to see him. But I think that she would have hung out with Jacob even if he couldn't have fixed the bikes. Like, he asked her, you know, hey, what if I couldn't fix the bikes or whatever? And she says, you know, I would have still hung out with you. We would have found something else. But I do generally believe that, because I do think that he was a really pivotal role in her kind of finding herself without Edward in her life, which is a weird thing to say after the short period of time we knew each other. But
it's very odd. And like, again, coming back to like, he's supposed to be even 6'5" already at his age. And like, we make him into this like such mature character very quickly, while Bella's still over here being dumb.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to like reconcile that for me. And then because she's a girl and he's a boy, and like commonly we know girls mature faster, most of them, evidently not Bella, and boys take quite a while if they never mature. So it's just weird trying to like reconcile that. And then for him to be like, I don't know, for him to be so convinced that she's done with Edward, even though she won't even say the guy's name or let him say the guy's name, is so weird to me. Because, like, this entire time, there's, like, an elephant in the room, and we just pretend the elephant's not there. But then when the elephant comes back, Jacob loses his mind.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that either. So, like, I thought he was mature. I thought he was understanding. And then now he's, like, a little 2-year-old throwing a tantrum because the elephant's been in the room with us the whole time, but he's now realized the elephant's in the room. Or so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it. But, so, I, liked the time that Jacob and Bella spend together. I love Jacob as a character. Jacob and Bella never made sense to me, though. Never once did I think Bella's going to go for it. Never once did I think Bella would ever be able to love him the way she loved Edward. And there's like a very faint moment where she talks about it. Like, could she have fallen for him right when Alice comes back? And even then, I think, though, like, even if Alice hadn't come back, I think she would have realized, like, no, like, I never would actually be happy. Like, I'd be settling, but I don't know. It's weird. This also because he's a child.
See, I have a different opinion. I do honestly think that if the Cullens had never shown their face again, it would have been Jacob, just because
You do? Okay.
I think
Is that fair to Jacob, though?
Not really, no. I feel like
Would they have had a child he would have imprinted on their child?
probably not.
Okay. But it's sad because that's why he has a close connection to Bella.
True.
Because of who she's going to birth.
I would hope not. But
Do you think, I think you said this maybe on another episode or maybe when we were discussing, didn't you say that you think if Edward had stayed away, Jacob eventually would have imprinted on Bella? Or did I make that up?
I think it could have been a possibility, but they don't really elaborate a whole lot into the imprinting. So I don't know if it seemed like it happened in an instant for everybody else, like the first sight. So I do think it's a possibility that if she would have been with Jacob, it is possible he could have come across somebody else in the future that he would have imprinted on instead of her. I do think that's a wide possibility, but
Got heart broke twice.
yeah, but I don't know, because they don't really elaborate whether or not that's something that can gradually like grow. And I don't know if they really know that much about it either to say that, but it could be where, you know, Renesmee never happened. So then he ends up growing his imprint on her or something.
Or just never imprinting in general, I guess.
True. Yeah. But I do think out of convenience almost it would have happened, but I don't want to say like convenience as like, I think if she would have had enough time away from Edward and away from the thoughts of Edward, that she would have grown to love Jacob out of convenience because he's the one there. But I genuinely think that she does really love and care for him. And so I think it was just more so minimizing how much she loved Edward and growing how much she loved Jacob, not per se like because he's there, she will love him more kind of thing. Does that make sense?
So see, I agree, and I think she loves Jacob, but I think it is platonic love.
Yeah.
I don't think it's romantic love. So, like, me picturing her settling and marrying Jacob and having Jacob's babies, but she's not romantically in love with him, sounds worse than her just being single for the rest of her life and letting Jacob move on. Like, Jacob doesn't deserve that. He deserves to have a wife that loves him and wants him too, and is not pining after the vampire that she knew for 6 months when she was 17.
But I think he was hoping that eventually she would move on and
Yeah.
move to him. But honestly,
He was hoping,
You
I
know-
do agree.
but to be honest though, you never kind of forget about your exes. I mean, they're always going to be there. And so I think
But they
he was
weren't just exes. Like, I feel like they use mates in the way like the imprinting thing happens. So like her and Edward, they kept calling them mates. And so and when she says like a piece of her is like gone, I think she like that legit was because they were mates. And so like that bond they had is literally tore a chunk of herself out now. Because it even says like once they're back together, like the back of the book says, like it's like there was never a wound in the first place. So it's not like you were scorned, you had to forgive him. It's like literally a piece of herself, like her soul.
But I don't think Jacob thought of it like that deep, to be honest.
Probably not. Probably not. I would agree with that.
He just thought it was like a 17-year-old's love.
I would agree with that. Jacob did not think of it that deep until we get through Eclipse and he realizes she ain't choosing him.
But I do think that he really did hope, and I do generally think that Jacob loved Bella the same way Edward loved Bella. But I think that if Edward had stayed away, Jacob would have earned her love and she would have forgotten about Edward. But I think because he came back, it was impossible for her to, and I don't want to say completely forget about him, because obviously you don't forget about your exes, but it would have been a faded memory for her instead of an active one.
Okay. Yes, yeah, I don't think so. I think there always would have been like a piece of her missing and she never would have been fully satisfied.
True. She would have.
Which I don't think is fair to Jacob. And also, I don't think that Jacob loves Bella the way that Edward loves Bella.
Okay.
Because I think Jacob cares a little bit more about what Jacob wants and what Jacob thinks Bella should want. And I don't think Edward does that. I think Edward thinks about what Bella wants and what she needs first and foremost.
I would disagree with Edward.
Yeah, you're Jacob girly, so.
Well, no, because I mean, he does decide what's best for Bella the entire time. He makes the rules of what's best for Bella.
He's not exactly wrong, though.
No, but
I just mean like Jacob is like, I love you, and you should want the kind of love that I give you, not the kind of love he gives you. And Edward is like, if you want me, I'm here. If you don't want me, I'm gone. Like, he's not, I don't know. It's different.
To me, I see it as Jacob accepts Bella who she is. She wants to ride dirt bikes. I'm with you. I'll ride them with you. You want to go cliff diving? I'm with you. Like, he's very supportive of whatever Bella wants and loves her for that.
Unless it's not him.
Well, yes.
He's not supportive of her being even friends with the Cullens.
No, but that's just based off of the stories that he has. But he doesn't say, hey, Bella, like, he does say like it's a terrible idea, but he still accepts Bella that she's going to go and do that. He doesn't like it. He doesn't want to be around it, but he's accepted that that's what's going to happen. Where Edward's like, this is how you need to be, what you need to do to be able to be in my life or me be around you kind of situation. And it's like a conditional kind of thing. Like, you have to marry me to become a vampire. You have to, do X, Y, and Z.
I think it's like what I always come back to is like, Edward never once told Bella, you cannot be friends with Jacob. You cannot have that relationship still. If that's what you want, you can have that. But if Bella had chosen Jacob, Jacob would not allow her to still be friends with Edward. He doesn't even want to be friends with Alice when they're not even together. Like, he is wholeheartedly against her deciding that for herself. He thinks he knows best. Edward is literally lets Jacob get naked and cuddle her to keep her warm so that Bella's taken care of. I don't know.
I would say Jacob for sure would be a little bit more jealous than what Edward was.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's interesting. But I do believe that he loved her. I'm not saying Jacob didn't love her. I think he does for sure love her. I just don't think he loves her in the way that she needed to be loved. I think Edward, now, granted, it gets better. And I should say, like, by the end of the books and the movies, because the beginning's a little rough for all of it, honestly.
Yeah.
But, like, by the time we get to, like, Eclipse, for example, I just don't think, I think if Bella told Edward, I don't want you, and I want you to go away, I think Edward would. If Bella told Jacob, I don't want you, as we see, he doesn't go away, because he believes he is best for Bella. And I'm not necessarily saying that a wolf isn't better than a vampire for a human girl, but she wants to be a vampire also. She's made that decision, and Jacob still doesn't respect it. And that's one thing about Jacob that really threw me off. Like, he was great about everything else, and then when she decided that by Eclipse, and he's just hanging on, and he's rude about it almost, like he says mean things on purpose, and that's what disenchanted me with Jacob. He lost me there.
I agree. He did push a little.
Yeah, and I get, like, the hatred runs deep. But, like, they also hate wolves, and they still are respectful of that with Bella. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see where you come from.
I don't know. That's what made me ultimately choose Edward, is the way that in Eclipse when Jacob just, no, I know what's better for you. No, I know I'm better for you than him. And she's like, dude, you never had a chance, to be quite honest. And he doesn't.
See, that was the part I liked about it, is that he continued to fight with her, even though it was pretty, like, set in stone. It wasn't gonna happen. Like, he loved her that much.
See, and I don't know that I would call that love. That you would badger someone so much until they decide they have to love you back because you told them they should. I don't know.
Like, I think if Trevor decided to leave me today, I would still fight for it, obviously.
Yeah, but that's 10 years of a relationship. They were never actually even together.
No, but Jacob's known her longer than Edward has, because he knew her whenever she was younger.
Yes, but the book really doesn't explore that as much as the movie does. The book kind of says, like, they get reintroduced on La Push, that beach that day, and she's like, oh, you're Billy's son, but she doesn't really remember interacting with them. She does the daughters, she said, but I don't know. It's weird. It's a little weird for me too, because he's a child. So it's like, I keep coming back to that. Like, when they first meet, he's so young that it's weird.
I get you.
But I love Jacob. I just don't like when Jacob starts that route, when she's clearly made a decision. Now, if she was indecisive and she wanted them both to be treating her so she could make a pick, that'd be different. But she's fully decided in Eclipse, and he's mean about it. I don't know.
I think Bella kind of draws it on a little bit though too.
That's fair. I think she let him on a new moon in Twilight, to be quite frank. And I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah. So we end up getting to the motorcycle ride, where Bella ends up having an accident, and she sees Edward and hears him for the first time.
In the movie?
Yes. Taylor Lautner takes off his shirt.
I loved that.
I remember the reaction too. Everybody's like, oh! But real good scene.
And the movie gives us that point of view of, like, we watch the interaction, and the book doesn't. The book gives you her point of view. So I actually like that scene better in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Because she's, like, dazed in the book, so she doesn't talk about, like, oh, he's taking off his shirt and he's so hot or anything like that for us to know what happened in the book, you know? And in the movie, he's stripping and she's just, like, bleeding out of her head. So it's just funny.
So after that, they decide that they are going to go to the movies, and she invites actually the group of friends to come along with Jacob. However, most of them end up bailing out for being sick, or Jessica, I don't think, wants to relive the last time that happened.
No. And I can't say that I blame her. I feel bad for Mike, though.
Mike is the one that I had a problem with continuing to try to win.
That's true. He did. He needed to give
he
up.
was the one that was like, there was no inkling that this was going to happen and consistently still tried. So
That's fair.
Jacob, I feel like there was at least a little bit of an inkling that could possibly happen.
I would agree with that.
So Mike and Jacob are the two that end up showing up. And so before we get into the movies, I also want to pinpoint about how Jacob was talking about how Sam and his pack were kind of like closely monitoring him, which made him like really uncomfortable. And Bella kept expressing like to stand up for herself. And like, he just didn't understand like why they were all waiting for something to happen with him.
He was like scared too.
Yes.
And in the movie, it was more like creepy.
Yeah, it just seemed like they were all just like washing him around tree corners and stuff. Like, are you changing now? What about now? Are you becoming...
Billy was rude. I don't like Billy in the book.
That is true. I didn't remember me disliking him as much, but I really liked him in the movie. He was kind of like kooky uncle kind of vibe in the movie, but in the book he was extremely rude multiple times. Yeah. So she ends up going to the movies with Mike and Jacob, and they sit there with their open palms.
I was acting out the hand open palms on each side of her. That is the weirdest thing, and I would have just slapped their hands off the armrest. I'm like, give my armrest. Like, what are y'all doing? This is weird. Especially because if it was just Bella and Jacob did that, it'd be one thing. If it was just Bella and Mike tried that, it would be one thing. You can literally see across Bella that the other man has his hand up on the armrest. Yeah. Have some dignity and put your hand down. I didn't like it.
And then to know he was feeling sick the entire movie and still trying to like make moves on her was just like, dreadful. But Mike ends up getting sick, runs to the bathroom, and so they kind of cut it short. And Jacob makes a promise that he'd never let Bella down. He never, hurt her, which
he breaks.
Multiple times.
He tried. You shouldn't make promises like that, though.
So whenever Bella gets home, she ends up getting sick in the middle of the night, and the next day she goes to call
That doesn't happen in the movie, right?
I don't remember it happening in the movie, no.
I didn't think so. Sorry. I couldn't. When I was reading it, I was like, I don't think that happened. But then maybe I thought I just breezed past it.
Yeah, I don't think it did, but I haven't.
And Jacob's not sick either. Jacob leaves from the movie theater because he's warm, and she thinks it might mean he's sick. But in the book, it actually is made out to be as if he also got sick. In reality, he's shifting.
Well, they were covering for him transitioning, I guess you could say. Yeah. And so she ends up trying to get a hold of Jacob for, it seems like at least a week or two. And Billy's kind of brushing her off and everything. So she decides to do something stupid and go and visit the meadow where her and Edward initially went in Twilight. And she ends up running across Laurent, who is back in town visiting for some reason.
She's so dumb because there have been threats about this big bear out in these woods.
Well, Charlie told her not to leave the house.
And she still goes. She goes to the meadow where, if I recall correctly, didn't they pass water on the last time on the way to the meadow, which clearly would attract animals?
Possibly.
Felt like there was also a little stream on their route, but maybe not.
I don't remember.
Maybe that was in my head in the movie, it just shows it in the movie. Maybe, I don't know. Anyways, but the meadow, girl, why would you go to the meadow? Also, here's what I don't understand. At this point, she didn't know that Laurent and Victoria were still there, but she knows that it's a possibility that a vampire could be passing through looking for the Cullens.
Yeah.
And she's still acting stupid. I don't like Bella.
Well, obviously. And then her reaction to Laurent, obviously he's a vampire. He's going to be able to hear your heart rate rise.
Literally.
And your blood rushing to your face and all of this stuff. So
for the heart rate calm.
Yeah, so the fact that you're lying to him and you're thinking that he's he's gonna get this, he's totally gonna believe me, is the stupidest thing ever.
I think it's funny in the movie she has that hallucination and he's lie to him. And then she lies and says, oh, they're just, gone briefly on vacation or whatever. And then he's like, more. I'll tell him you stopped by. And then he says, I don't think they're coming back. And then he's threaten him. And I'm thinking, he doesn't care about you, right? That's what we just established 6 months ago. So Why would he care if Laurent killed you?
Yep.
He knew it was a possibility that a vampire would come back through for them too, and he left you there.
Yep.
So why are you picturing Edward anything? You need to focus on the fact that there is a predator in front of you. It was just insane. I just thought, how dumb are you? You deserve to get eaten by a vampire in the meadow because you don't pay attention. It made me mad.
It was really hard to follow.
She was told all these stories about wolves, right? Here come these giant wolves. There's no way they could be regular wolves. They're bigger than regular bears even. And it never once crosses her mind that those might also be monsters. She sees them as wolves, and she's like, oh, the wolves would also attack me in general. But it never crosses her mind that they may be something more than just regular wolves, even though they're literally 10 feet tall. And they are. In the book, they're described as massive.
To be honest, what kind of turned me off of the situation was the fact that she looked at the red and brown one and instantly thought of Jacob.
But then,
how
didn't connect the dots.
How looking in this wolf's eyes do you just think, you know what? I wonder what Jacob's doing right now.
I don't understand it. I don't understand anything about that scene. I don't understand anything about most of the scenes in this book, to be quite frank. I also do not understand why she was so convinced that those giant wolves would have no chance against Laurent. I understand she's thinking of regular wolves, but they're obviously ginormous. And I'm pretty sure that if Laurent had been there for a while, the wolves would have caught, his scent before, and this altercation would have happened already, at least once or twice. And if he had killed one of their pack, they wouldn't go back after him. They'd recognize him as a superior predator because they're animals and that's how their brain works. I would imagine. I'm not an expert, but from what I know, that's how it works. Anyways, so then why would they now be coming back? It didn't make any sense. Then this dummy could barely make it back to the car. What? She had to put the compass down on the ground because her hand was shaking so bad she couldn't hold the compass straight. But you thought it was a good idea to go there in the first place. Then she tells Charlie, oh, they're wolves. Go hunt the wolves, not the bear. Why? Why would you do that? It's dumb. What I don't understand is this. Why did she ever... Because Charlie says the prince didn't look like a bear anyways, right?
Yep.
So why would she... I don't understand the connection where she thinks the wolves are the ones killing the people. In town. In town. Not even just in the woods, but in town. How would those wolves come into town? They're that ginormous, and not a single person has accurately been able to tell you that they're wolves and not a bear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's dude was killed down at the boat dock. And the way he was killed, the wolves aren't going to drain him of his blood. Which that's in the first book. That's one of the first kills. I guess I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I guess just maybe trying to be what's that? What's the words I'm looking for? Blindly ignorant, almost. Just this isn't something that could be real, so now we have to make it fit our story of what we know is real, kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that. That's really the only explanation that would make sense to me. Yeah. But even then, that's stupid. What I don't understand is this. If she believes that vampires exist, I would just work on the principle that every other monster in the world also existed.
True.
Or at least assume so, and then until proven wrong or whatever. But you think there's only one kind of why she didn't think, oh, those stories about those werewolves might be true, and they're mortal enemies to vampires. That's what we just said in the story. I don't understand it.
I think I could understand her perspective of not believing that because Edward never told her that other creatures exist. So I think, you would think that if you're a magical creature and you're saying, hey, you need to be careful out in the world because there's more dangerous people out there, dangerous vampires out there, you would also say, and other creatures, to kind of like say, hey, like there's a world out there that you don't understand. But instead he just talks about vampires. And so honestly, until Jacob's family pack kind of came along, she never really did have any idea that werewolves existed other than the legends, which once one was confirmed, understandably, you could possibly think that more, but you would also think that the one that was confirmed would tell you that others are out there kind of situation too.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like even if she had a hard time believing that they were werewolves, the moment that Jacob says, we are wolves, that's us, they exist, why does she still think they're the ones killing humans when it doesn't make sense from the stories that he also told her? And how would they be so good at hunting that nobody on the reservations died? Only people in town. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just don't understand it.
Well, and a lot of it I do think could be because like the Volturi in Breaking Dawn seems surprised that werewolves exist. So my thought in several of the other vampires that they come across once they, especially in Eclipse and stuff, Victoria seems surprised that there's wolves and stuff like that too. So my kind of thought is like maybe it is like a legend that they think is a legend and that was just part of how vampire stories evolved, or you know, stuff like that, because you think the Volturi would know that werewolves were actually a legit thing that were out there, especially because it's a threat to their race, or you know, stuff like that. So you would think that they would understand that. So by them being surprised by it, I'm going to run under the assumption that it's just one of those legends that they think is actually a legend and not something that was actually truth kind of situation.
So I read like Victoria's and the Volturi surprised at the wolves more as they were surprised that the Cullens and the wolves could work together to do something.
Okay.
Because
yeah.
like the enemy lines, I didn't read it as they didn't know they didn't exist. I read it as more as like they were shocked that they were able to overcome that like history long thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would
and,
also
and,
make sense.
and I don't know for sure which way it is, but that's just the way that I read it. I never thought about that it might change, but I never thought about they didn't know they didn't exist. I thought it was they didn't think they could overcome that like hatred between the parties. Essentially,
we also like we don't learn about mermaids, so like, could mermaids be real? Could they be out there? Could that be just another legend that somebody's made up? So you know, that's like another thing that
I have a lot of questions. Are sirens real? That's one of my favorite mythical creatures, and every world that like has fantasy, every book that I read that's fantasy, I'm thinking, are we gonna add in sirens? Gonna put in sirens. They're my favorite. Like I love the concept of sirens. We don't see them a whole lot, but anywho, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. So Bella goes to try to confront Jacob for ignoring her, and Bella just
Which it's about time. Can I just say that I'm so glad she finally got a backbone and went and did something.
And so Jacob just kind of brushes her off, and he's just like, "You can't help me. Nobody can help me now." Like, it's almost like depressingly accepting your fate, I guess you could say. Like, I'm this horrible monster now, so I want nothing to do with you. Like, you don't need to be around me kind of situation. But
which I get to an extent because like the anger issues, but like also
my thing is it doesn't quite make sense knowing that she was around vampires and she was willing to risk her life for that. So like, why would you think she'd be willing to risk her life for?
They literally crave her essence of her life, but you think your anger issues are more concerning?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird. But also, the Cullens kind of act like that too. Like Alice kind of says, like, oh no, like you don't need to hang out with them. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's like, yo man tried to attack her over a paper cut. What are we talking about?
True.
It's just weird.
So Jacob then blames his situation on the Cullens, and he ends up like breaking into her room that night and goes on to tell her that he can't outright tell her what's going on, but she can guess what's going on. And so she ends up having a dream where she ends up guessing that Jacob is a werewolf. So she gets up
Which
that
makes
morning.
no sense again.
Yeah. And so she gets up that morning to go confront Jacob and waits for him on the beach whenever she finds out he's still sleeping. And so she basically confronts him and just says, you know, why are you killing everybody? Why are you, you know, doing that? And Jacob gets like so like ecstatic that she's like okay with him being a werewolf and like hugs her. And she's like, what is going on? And he's like, well, if you think the worst thing I am is a murderer, I'm not. So great, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
He's like, you're not freaked out that I'm literally a wolf? And she's like, no, I'm freaked out that you kill people. He's like, I don't kill people. What are you talking about? She's like, you don't kill people? He's like, no, you idiot. She's like, so then who is killing people? Because this obviously needs to be a problem that needs to get solved. What doesn't make any sense to me, though? Why do we miss the scene? Because in the movie, she punches Paul. In the book, she doesn't punch him. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. It was a good scene. It reminds me of Hermione whenever she punches Draco in the face.
And then she which that's the next book, but she punches Jacob in the face too. I think it's so funny how combative she all of a sudden gets in these two little moments. And every other time she's like a meek little human. Mm-hmm. Strange.
She chooses
Sorry.
her battles very intensely.
I say very rarely, but she does sometimes. But I agree. I thought it was cute how he she's confused because he breaks out in a smile when she says it, and she's like, why are you happy about that? What is wrong with you? And he's like, I don't kill people, ho. Like, if that's your only problem, we good, fam. You know, it's just funny.
Well, I do find it very odd, though, that she didn't connect the dots considering Laurent was around. That could be who was killing the people.
She's stupid. I'm telling you.
Especially when she describes how his eyes are so blood red. Like,
and he says he says he's been hunting.
Yeah.
Like he said he's been coming to eat, essentially. I don't know.
So then Jacob decides to call kind of like a meeting. And this meeting is basically so Bella can inform the pack kind of inside trader information, I guess you could say, about the Cullens and the vampires, Victoria and Laurent. And she basically says like why they're hunting her, which they do this all at Emily's house, which we end up finding out is Sam's imprinted significant other. And she has long scars across her face because Sam had gotten upset and changed while around her. So that kind of like instigates the kind of the talk about the dangers and stuff like that where werewolves can be around her.
Yes, I also don't really understand that though, because in the movie, we see Paul have his little tantrum or whatever, but we have moments where they're in wolf form for combat training, and none of them are losing their cool. Everybody's chill. It doesn't make any sense to me, I guess. I guess I would have liked more of an explanation of that anger and what it comes from, what causes it exactly. And why, I get it, it might force your transformation, but why even after transforming would you still claw her? I guess I'd like to know what made him mad at her. Why did he attack her? You know what I'm saying? Because, I don't know. Animals' brains are different, so it doesn't make sense to me.
To me, I read it as, so they were, I still don't think Sam is that old as far as werewolf, aging. So I don't think he's been werewolf long time. So I still think he's kind of fresh. And they talk about how he was very quick to anger with his transition. And I also am curious to wonder whether or not he was actually with Emily whenever he first transformed, and their argument was actually what made him transform. And that's whenever he ended up hurting her, was whenever he first transitioned the first time.
That would make more sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we never get an answer to that story, I don't think. So makes a lot of sense. But so after all of that, it makes the most sense. But they end up on spring break. Jacob's kind of really busy with trying to track down Victoria. She's still trying to get to Bella and hurt her. And
I did
So
not remember Bella and Charlie pretty much staying on the reserve. I didn't remember
it
that part.
didn't happen, I don't think, in the movie that way.
I don't think so either. But I didn't remember that it happened like that in the book either. They practically lived there for quite some time.
Yeah, I did remember like them visiting a couple times, but I didn't remember it being like they were there day and night kind of situation. So Bella decides whenever Jacob's busy one night that she's going to take Jacob up on his idea of cliff diving. And so she goes to the edge and she starts hearing Edward again for the 8th billionth time. And it kind of sound a little suicidal. I ain't gonna lie. And like her exchange with her subconsciously Edward person.
It sounds suicidal for me because after she jumps into the water, she says, I never really even thought about the water or the current or the storm.
Well, and he says, like, keep fighting. And she's like, why? And then she says, like, I don't want to fight anymore. Like,
they're like floating in the water. It's so stupid.
Dramatic.
And like her arm like goes through her image of him, and like he fades away. What?
It was very dramatic.
Oh, it was awful.
So after Jacob saves Bella from drowning, they return home to find Alice waiting, and Bella convinces Alice to stay and visit with her and Charlie. After a vision, Alice ends up seeing that Edward is trying to harm himself because he thinks Bella didn't make it off the cliff. Alice and Bella fly to rescue Edward and end up with a personal visit to Vulture's lair. Upon returning home, Bella is determined to become a vampire, and Edward refuses to change her unless she marries him first. So, once they do get home, they end up coming across what she says is at Carlisle's car outside of her house, which Jacob instantly is like trying to get her away because he just sensed vampires. He doesn't know who's the vampire is. So he assumes it's Victoria or somebody, and she ends up seeing that it's more than likely Alice. So she tells him to turn around.
Let me ask you this though. Just because it's Carlisle's car, would you believe that it had to be one of the Cullens? My thought was Victoria done stole his car and is going to set you up.
I would have been a little bit skeptical, and I think she was when she walked in the door, but I think up until then she just was like, oh my god, they're back kind of situation.
Irrational.
Edward did say that he stole Carlisle's car in the last one because it was fast enough for him to get away. So, like, whenever he left Bella or whatever to go stay with the Denali's after he first met her or whatever, he went to get Carlisle's car because it had a full tank of gas and, left. So I could understand where she sees Carlisle's vehicle and automatically thinks, oh, it could possibly be Edward or one of the Cullens or whatever.
I thought it's a setup immediately. The very first time that I read this.
Yes. Which would have been a little bit more interesting, to be honest. But
I agree, actually. It kind of would have been more fun that had it been Victoria.
Yeah, kidnapping her.
Yeah, so that's what should have happened. Not Edward being suicidal. It should have been Victoria kidnapped her and then called Edward, and she's like telling Victoria, Edward's not going to show up. He doesn't love me. He doesn't want me. He left me. And then boom, here's Edward, and Victoria dies. But then that also would ruin the next book, so that doesn't really help. True. We have a lot of ideas on how to ruin the rest of the remaining books by getting rid of these characters quicker.
It's true. So Bella ends up turning around, obviously, and going back and finding it's Alice. Alice ends up being convinced to stay, and Bella kind of describes a little bit of what she's been going through, but by no so I really enjoyed, which I kind of wish there was that conversation in the movie of Alice and Charlie sitting down describing what all was happening, because it really took you into a perspective of actually what all from the outside you were seeing in kind of thing.
I was going to ask you, did you like that better with them being there for a day or two before Edward actually called, or did you like it in the movie how it was in the same scene?
I really enjoyed the book, how it was kind of like, drawn out a little bit further, because I do think that it was important for Alice and Charlie to have that conversation, because then Alice was able to kind of relay that. I think this is just my thought process. It doesn't say that, but I think Alice would have relayed that when she ran across Edward, like, this is what all Bella's gone through. from Charlie's perspective, replaying those kind of things, seeing Bella and how she was reacting, like, replaying all of that for Edward to really understand that, Edward, you're not the only person that's been hurting because of this decision you made. It's really, you're hurting Bella just equally. So I think that added a lot to that.
I agree. My only question is, by dragging it out, from the way that I read it, it wasn't hardly even like a 24-hour period. Like, she got there early on the morning, one morning, and by like the next afternoon is when everything fell apart. Yeah. But even in that time period, I would have assumed like Jasper would have called to check on her, and she would have said like, "No, Bella's alive. It's all good." And then when Rosalie would have gotten the phone call from Edward, Jasper could have been like, no, she's good. Or Rosalie would have already known, or, you know what I mean? Like, that expanding it did confuse me. That kind of left me confused because it was drawn out that way. I did like it, that part, but I wish that would have been clarified. Like, no, they haven't called, or they'll service, or they're, something to explain how in 24 hours at least she hadn't alerted them that Bella's okay.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that with it being drawn out, there should have been a little bit more of like an understanding on Rosalie's part. I don't know. The timeline didn't quite make sense there, but honestly, a lot of it didn't make sense in looking back on it. At the same time, all of that was happening, Harry Clearwater, which is Billy and Charlie's good friend, had a heart attack and passed. And so whenever Jacob comes by to kind of remind Bella and Alice about the treaty, they end up getting a phone call from Edward, and he asks to speak to Charlie, and he says he's not here, he's at a funeral. So that pretty much solidifies the fate of Edward, I guess you could say, or at least where he's decided to go. And so Alice ends up coming in and saying she's had a vision of Edward trying to go to the Volturi to kill himself. And
I just want to add, I liked the movie giving us that little scene of where Harry saw Victoria and that's why he had a heart attack, as opposed to in the book he just had a heart attack.
Yeah. It did add a little bit of extra.
Yeah. Also, I would have punched Jacob in the face.
True.
Why are you answering my phone? And Carlisle and Edward sound different. It's shady.
He did hear Edward to that point, so right?
Yeah. No, yes. He saw Bella at the prom at least and heard Edward speak then. I feel like there was other instances. There was more in the movie, I think, than there was in the book, but.
Okay.
But I know for sure at prom, because he came and gave that warning from his dad. And Edward was right there, and they chatted for just a brief little interaction. But either way, he's like, I feel like out of anger, he said he's at a funeral, and that's made it seem like Bella's funeral.
So Alice and Bella decide to fly to Italy to rescue Edward.
I like the book version. I mean, the movie version of this. I got way too many details in the book, I felt like, about their flight, and I was like, I don't really care, to be quite frank.
Like the
however that is
flight and stuff.
I was gonna say that's when we learned about Cynthia, though.
Yeah, it was a lot, but so they get there, and Alice steals a car, and they end up making it to like this center where there's a bunch of like cloaks, like a celebration for the Volturi. And so Edward has made a decision that he's going to step out from underneath the bell tower and expose his sparkly self to the world. And so he's going to get killed by the Volturi if he does that. So she like slow-mo runs across this like area and like wraps herself around Edward to prevent him from exposing his sparkly self.
Let me ask you this. Did you like it better that in the book he was in like a little alleyway as opposed to in the movie when he's like on the steps with the big doors?
Yes, because I think the alleyway would have made more sense for what happens after the fact, where it was too much of a production to be kind of right there in the center of everything.
Okay. It made more sense to me to expose himself at the double doors. But what happened afterwards, I agree, makes more sense in the alleyway.
Yeah.
But also, don't you think it's how weird how they like travel through the sewer? Now, logically, that makes sense. But like in the
Yes.
book, we don't ever do anything that's logical. Or like in the movie, we don't ever do anything that's logical. So like them traveling through sewers and stuff, I was like, wait a minute, when did that happen? I forgot all about that.
The guard of the Volturi, and they are saying that, the Volturi are requesting their presence. And so they go down into sewers and come across their grand court, I guess is what you can call it. To be honest, it was just kind of creepy to me, like, especially movie Arrow, like he's just too happy to be alive for thousands of years.
Fake joy, the fake, is so creepy.
But honestly, though, I do kind of feel like it was genuine, because I do feel like this is probably like the most action, like something unexpected he's seen in quite a long time. So he may be like, oh, finally some excitement in my life, kind of thing.
I also think I think like the best way that I would describe Aro is like he's a collector of nice things, a collector of talented people. So I could see it being genuine, because the prospect of these three really talented, or at least one potentially talented, Bella, when turned, being stuck and owing him, I could see that bringing him joy for sure.
Arrow ends up talking to Bella, Alice, and Edward, and is kind of curious as far as, because one of his talent is where he can touch you and kind of get a sense of every one of your memories you've ever had. And so he is kind of curious, because he learns that Edward can't hear Bella's thoughts, whether or not Bella can have the same, which turns out doesn't have the same effect, or it does have the same effect where he can't read her thoughts. And so he asked for some of the other members of his guard that have special talents to have the same thing happen, which Jane kind of gets a little, I feel like that's kind of the start of like where Jane's like, oh, you're the one that kind of got away situation. So she kind of has a thing out for Bella since then, but she is pretty upset about that. And so they kind of tried to decide what to do with him, because they understand that Edward has it in his head that that's not going to happen, that she's never going to become a vampire. And so Alice ends up showing him the gift that she has a solid vision that Bella will end up a vampire one way or another. Yeah. So he ends up letting them go and just saying, hey, we'll check up on you in the future.
Which, if I'm being honest, the smartest thing that Bella has ever said is, don't they realize how subjective her visions are, and how could they believe that? The fact that Bella thought of that and nobody else did, which I think they did. I think it was on purpose. I think they were hoping that they wouldn't change her in the future so that they could force it and punish them. You know what I mean? Like, I think that was kind of the intention. But the fact that even Bella considered it means it had to be pretty obvious.
Yeah.
She's pretty dumb.
So we also get that whenever Bella comes back home, she's really exhausted, so she sleeps for quite a while. When she wakes up, she believes she's dreaming at first, and then whenever she realizes it's actually legitly there, she starts believing that Edward's gonna leave her again. So she's just pretty much like, you just need to go. Like, just if you're gonna leave me, go ahead and go. And because
like the whole time they're at the Volturi in Italy, she's like, oh, he's holding me, but he doesn't really want me. He's holding me, but like he's just doing that for show.
I'm just gonna take my last moments with him, before he leaves again.
So
Which
dramatic.
Honestly, though, I think that is part that would have been hard, is that she didn't ever know those were like my last moments with him before he left the first time around. So at least she's like taking that in of like, oh, I can remember how his hair feels this time, or things like that. So he does say,
how his hair feels is such a weird thing to say.
Oh no, it's the first thing I came up with. So
that's good.
I really love the quote whenever he's trying to convince her, and he says, before you, Bella, my life was a moonless night, very dark, but there were stars, points of light and reason, and then you shot across the sky like a meteor. Suddenly everything was on fire. There was brilliancy, there was beauty. When you were gone, when the meteor had fallen over the horizon, everything went black. Nothing had changed, but my eyes were blinded by the light. I couldn't see stars anymore. There were no more reasons for anything. And so she says, your eyes will adjust. And he says, that's the problem. They can't. And so he ends up saying, like, everything he said was a lie, that you were never a distraction. It was all me just trying to break everything off. And so she says, okay, let's change me. Let's go. If we're going to be together, let me be a vampire. And he says, no, not happening. So she starts getting ready and he's like, what are you doing? She said, well, you can stay here, make yourself comfortable, but I'm going to go take a vote at your house. And so he ends up taking her to the house.
Bella grew a backbone?
Yeah.
Look at her go.
So they end up going to the house and they call like a family meeting and they all take a vote. And so Alice says yes. Jasper says yes, which I don't really like how in the movie or in the book, he doesn't say the line that he says in the movie, but he says in the movie, you know, it'd be nice not to want to kill you all the time or something like that.
Yes.
And of course, Edward had voted no. Rosalie voted no, but she says that, you know, let me explain. I don't mean that I have any aversion to you as a sister, which that's a long way from where we were before. It's just that this is not the life I would have chosen for myself, and I wish there had been someone there to vote no for me.
Which I will say was very sweet.
Yes.
Considering what she wanted, and by becoming a vampire, took that away from her.
Yeah.
So I do understand that. But also, like, this ain't about you, ho. You know, I'm just saying.
Well, and then Emmett says, hell yes. And Esme says, yes, of course. I always think of you as part of a family, are part of the family. And Carlisle turns to Edward and said, it's the only way that makes sense. You've chosen not to live without her, and that doesn't leave me a choice. And so she pretty much just like, okay, well, where do we do this now? And everybody's like,
yeah, she's like, so Alice, you ready?
Yeah.
Alice is like, no.
Yeah. And so
Carlisle's pretty much like, yeah, cool, let's do it.
And so they're all just like, okay, let's just wait till after graduation, you know, so that way it's a little less conspicuous, which obviously that makes most sense because obviously she's going to go disappearing for a little bit and more than likely can't be at school for the rest of the school year. So they end up going home and Edward kind of asks, you know, what if you could have anything, you know, what would it be? And she says, you know, I want you to be able to do it, which is a little weird because, I mean, granted, I don't really feel like it's a romantic kind of thing, but I could understand where you want to say, like, Edward's my creator and not Carlisle. I don't know.
It's kind of romantic.
I don't know. But
he gave me immortality so that we could live together forever.
True.
It's kind of hot.
So he then says, like, you know, forget the limits or whatever, because he's trying to like negotiate how long it's going to take. He says, you just have to meet one condition and I'll do it. And she says, you know what? He says, marry me first. And she's like, okay, what's the punchline? And he's like, it's not a joke. I just proposed to you. And I do like the line where he says, well, I'm nearly 110. It's time I settled down. And he says, please don't tell me you're afraid of commitment. And she's like, it's not exactly that. It's just my mom's kind of really intense opinions on getting married before 30. And so he like starts begging her to marry him, which was kind of cringe because like, if she really wanted to, she would have just said yes. So like, you're basically saying, hey, the only way you're going to live with me forever is if you marry me. So I don't know. It was.
I liked it. I liked that he was like, I just proposed and you're laughing at me. And she was like, oh, you're serious? And he's like, yeah. I will say, I think it's better described in the movie because he describes it more as like, I want you to have these human experiences and I want you to get those before this happens. And I want like my commitment to you to also be memorialized in some form or fashion, and marriage is the way to do that, you know, for humans or whatever. So I think the movie describes it a lot better. So it wasn't as creepy to me. If I had just read the book though and had no movie, it'd be creepy. I would agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So she ends up agreeing to it and they're on their merry way. And then randomly they show up after school one day and find Jacob standing in the front lawn and her bicycle or her motorcycle. And so Charlie is irate. And he was basically like, oh, I was just trying to figure out some way to like get you grounded where he couldn't come around or whatever, which honestly, I don't get how that would make her not go around Edward per se, but more like not around Jacob because
Correct.
he's the one that has a motorcycle.
I agree.
But Charlie just basically starts screaming at her from the house, and she's like, I'm already grounded for life, Jake. Like, why would you do that? And he just pretty much says, like, you know, I'm sorry, you know, this is the last thing I could think of. And he misses her, whatever. And
Which didn't work either. I mean, she gets grounded and she's limited to what she can see Edward, but she can still see Edward.
Yeah. Well, she kind of makes that a requirement, to be honest. She's like, I'll move out if not. So
he's like, oh, you big now, huh?
Uh-huh.
I also thought it was funny, Charlie like really putting his foot down finally. I got a little cackle out of that. And I was like, I'm surprised she didn't call him out and be like, dude, when have you ever been a parent?
True.
But him being like, you better get out of my house, Edward, and you better not come back here, and you're not welcome, because defending his daughter, that was hot. I'm not gonna lie. I liked that.
So what is your final thoughts and ratings?
You know, that's a great question. As always, I wait till this last minute to rate anything. So I think I would give New Moon, because I do think each book gets better. There's still very cringe moments, but there were certain moments in this book that I really, really liked, especially like with Bella and Jacob. And then the end, really setting that, the Volturi up and like what kind of happens next. I did like several of those moments. I'd probably give this book a 4.3. It's not that much better than Twilight, but it is just slightly better. Building upon that story, we're getting towards where I really want to get in the next couple of books. Throughout this episode, I've probably complained the entire time, probably said nothing positive, but now as an adult, I'm not a massive fan of the character for Bella. I don't like how she's like kind of whiny and doesn't, and like then randomly gets a backbone. So I did like those moments, like putting it to a vote. I thought that was like so girl boss of her. It's like, yes, thank you. Take it into your hands and get it done, because Edward's not going to do it, you know. But other than that, there were several moments that I thought were very cringe and could have been done a lot better. Or like didn't even have the context to, like having the movie gave us more context than the book did, or different things like that too. So there's definitely room for improvement. And honestly, the last book I might have rated a little too high. I might have gone down a little bit more, and this one gone down a little bit more too if I'd done that. But I'll say 4.3. What is yours?
I would say 4. It's a 0.1% higher. It just, to me, like, I did really like the relationship with Bella and Jacob. I felt it was very genuine. It wasn't rushed. It was very just like go with the flow kind of friendship. But my biggest complaint with this book is nothing crazy happens. Like, I get like Edward tries to commit suicide and all that stuff, so that's like there. But to me, like, there was no epic battle. There was no like, you know, in means to an end kind of situation. It wasn't like epic. I did find it less cringier than the last one, so that's why it's a little bit higher. However, it still was pretty cringy. But I do feel like she felt a little bit more comfortable with herself with Jacob than she did with Edward, so it didn't get as cringy. I did really like that she was kind of trying to find herself without Edward, and I do think that may be why that gave her a backbone, is that she was able to stand kind of on her own. But I didn't like it as much as what I did when I was younger. This was actually like the lower ranking one out of all of them for me when I was younger. It's actually a little bit higher than Twilight now, but it just, I don't know. It didn't have the same magic as what it did for me before, but it definitely could have been better.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said too, I think having the context of the movie made me like this book a little bit more, because there were several pieces that I think should have been better in the book. And again, I think we say this probably in every episode, but there were certain parts of the book that I thought could have been cut out, and other things that could have been added to make it better.
Yeah.
And that would be my main complaint probably about this book, is that we really, really drug it out for something that was more of just like a filler.
Yeah.
Like, we probably could have added part of it to the end of Twilight, and
it definitely should not have been this thick. No, by any means.
Not at all. I agree. So
for nothing crazy to happen, it should not have been that thick.
No, and honestly, the movie gives us the better context, like for her depression and things like that too. Like we really see that better in the movie. The book doesn't go heavy detail into Bella's feelings. I mean, it references like she feels like she has a hole and like she's empty and she's in pain, but it kind of it's from Bella's point of view. So you see it as Bella would, and Bella's not recognizing what's happening, you know, for those 4 months until Charlie calls it out. And so you don't really get to see it from an outsider's point of view. So I think I liked that better watching the movie than having it from Bella's point of view. I would have liked it almost like having Charlie's point of view while Bella was going through those 4 months or whatever before he had a fit or something like that. Which is obviously, you know, the entire book is from Bella's point of view, so that's asking a lot to say, no, hey, you should have wrote it in Dad's point of view, but it just would have been nice to have somebody else's perspective to get the full experience of her depression.
You know what would have made this more interesting for me?
What?
Is actually done this book in Edward's perspective. Because Edward's time, whenever he was away from Bella, like his thought process of breaking up with her.
To flip back and forth, I think would have been beautiful.
And then, like, especially when we get to the Volturi, like him reading all of their minds and kind of filling out what they're thinking and stuff would have been extremely interesting.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. I think if we'd each chapter flip back and forth and then, like, what she's doing over here and then what he's doing and like, got that full picture, I think would have been so much better. I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's what she should have wrote instead of Midnight Sun.
Yeah. I wasn't really interested in his perspective in Twilight, for sure.
Yeah, I think that...
Not about his spider.
See, though, I think that's just bad writing. Because I am interested in Edward's point of view, but not in the way that it was written.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But, okay, so... As always, if you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please subscribe to get access to bloopers, extra content, and more on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Patreon, YouTube, and just about any other platform that you can listen to podcasts on.
You can also send us book suggestions, comments, or general inquiries to our email at likewereadthem@Karl with a K. You can also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I do also want to say that we have been looking at our different areas that we are reaching out to, and we do have several international followers. So we would love for you guys to join our Facebook page and just comment and let us know where you guys are from. We just find it so interesting to be reaching out to so many of you guys across the pond, I guess you can say. And and so it's just really interesting to hear and see where all we're reaching to. And we really generally hope that you guys enjoy watching it. But it is Karl and Podcast, or Karl and Like We Read Them on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So we hope to hear from you guys, and you guys can leave us some comments and stuff on there.
Yes, we appreciate you tuning into this episode. Next week, we will obviously be discussing Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer. The little blurb on the back says, "In the dead silence, all the details suddenly fell into place for me with a burst of intuition. Something Edward didn't want me to know. Something that Jacob wouldn't have kept from me. It was never going to end, was it?" So tune in next week to hear more about the next book in this saga, and as always, we promise to Karl them like we read them.
Theme song.